I'm talking to you, I'm talking to way back there.
I wonder if you can you hear me back there?
It looks good, it looks like.
Emma?
He was
I guess I'm Peter. Can you hear me back there, Emma? And Rosemary?
Andrea.
Okay, I guess we have to talk a little bit closer to the mic. So, I'm Tom Hogan, the coordinator for the Milwaukie Poetry Series. And thank you all for being here tonight for our November meeting in the Milwaukie Poetry Series. And just call your attention, I think most of you have seen the refreshments back here, but we do have refreshments. So if you want to get something and you haven't gotten something, now would be a good time to do it. Because we're a few minutes away from me introducing our poet for the evening, George Venn. It's been a great night, and I don't know if you saw the library. How many people saw the library on your way over? Exactly. So you know we're getting a new library, and I would say that I've been working on it for 15 years. First on the library board, and then on the library expansion committee. And today, when I drove over here to the pond house to set up, was actually the first day that I'd seen the building torn down. So the building has been down the last couple of days. Those of you that are here in Milwaukie maybe know that the library is temporarily relocated about 10 blocks, maybe 12, north on Main Street to the parking lot for the old Southgate Theater. So it's in there in a number of double wides. And they've done quite a good job, I think, for the fact that it's double wides. But
I'm still traumatized. Every time I walk by, at the back, it's depressing.
That's how I felt when I came by the library today. It's you know how you're ready for something new and you know you need it. And we've really done a lot of work over the years to convince the citizens of Milwaukie to pass the bond issue, which they did. And so we're getting a brand new library. So there's going to be a brand new one-story building over here on the footprint where the library was. Wow. And some of the history of it is that some of the parts of that library were actually Florence Ledding's house. So this library was incorporated around her house, but she was an early pioneer, she lived there. And she was the one that donated the land over here with the stipulation in perpetuity that it be used for a library. So she saw the potential for it, and the city of Milwaukee has been very lucky to have that bequest because it is designed specifically for a library, and the library has to stay there. And we like that. So that's an update on the library. And some thanks I want to make to the city of Milwaukie, of course. I've been talking about that a couple of times, but let me check with just how many people are here for their first time. Because I asked George this question. This is George's first time here.
Welcome, George.
So that's great that you're here. And thanks to the city of Milwaukie who have been supportive of this, and the Ledding Library, and the Milwaukie Poetry Series. So you know we have a Milwaukie Poetry Series committee, and there are 3 of us here, and 1 former member. Maybe the former member could stand with the other 3. Would you like to do that?
Sure, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. And Dan and I are already standing. Dan's back here. So thank you very much for that. We do have 2 new videographers who are me and Dan Hobbs back here, who is pointing the camera. And we did it the first time last week, and we got a pretty good copy of Samia Bashir's reading. So I took a look at it, and it all went fine, and then we edited it okay, and it all looks fine. So we're expecting that same thing is going to continue to happen tonight. If you haven't got a copy of the broadside, they are here, and please do that. I see, you notice my cell phone is actually ringing, but I have it on silent, so it's not disturbing us all. And I'm reminding everybody, if you want to silence your telephonic devices, that would be great. And in fact, I am going to turn mine off. Our next poet is Andrea Hollander. So Andrea is going to be here on the second Wednesday of December, and I think that's the 12th. If those of you who are looking at the flyer that's on the front of this. So we've been very excited and looking forward to the reading that George is going to do tonight. I had a chance to talk to Barbara Drake, who isn't able to be here, and she had to send her regrets. But she said, I'm sorry to be there because we don't see George much on this side of the mountains. And I think that's, I'm understanding that's probably true. George is here from LaGrande. He lives in LaGrande. He's got, as you may have seen on the invitation, an extensive vitae, poet, writer, literary historian, editor, linguist, and educator. He says his distinguished and eclectic practice may be best affirmed by Making the Magic Circle, OSU Press, 1987, a 200-page collection of fiction, poetry, essays, translations, and photographs. In 1988, this book won an Oregon Book Award and silver medal from the Literary Arts. In 2005, the Oregon Cultural Heritage Commission and the Oregon State Library selected it as one of the 100 best Oregon books in 2 centuries. Congratulations on that, George. As a student, he studied extensively, and he got an MFA from the University of Montana in 1970. In the 70s, he won a Breadloaf Scholarship. And in 1980, his poem, Forgive Us, from Off the Main Road, 1978, won a Pushcart Prize. When he received the 1995 Anders Berger Award for Poetry, the Oregonian described him as one of the best known and most respected poets in the state, unquote. His 1999 collection, West of Paradise, was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award. In 2009, the Oregon State Library and Poetry Northwest selected West of Paradise for their honorific listing 100 Oregon poetry books. His poems and stories have been widely published in periodicals and anthologized. His work has been included in the National Poetry in Motion program, carved in stone at the New Oregon Zoo. 3 different composers, he says, have set his lyrics to music for concert performances across the Pacific Northwest. His most recent books include Beaver Fire, 2016, a 400-page selection of his nonfiction about Pacific Northwest writers between 1970 and 2010, and Lichen Song, New and Selected Poems, 2017. In 2017, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the College of Idaho, an extensive vitae, as you see. Would you join me in welcoming our poet for the evening? Delighted to have him here, George Venn.
You're very kind. Got it?
Yeah.
Be remote. Visitors may never see this lost range you settled for. Juniper, mule deer, riata, Chinese gold, one umatilla is your friend. High blue day on high blue day, the hidden spring gives up its cold artesian calm. This water keeps you close to bones. By ravenous, deserted towns, you are small as a gnat's ear. At night, by an obsidian sky, singing surrounds you, deep, fragile, far. Where such edges, you can let the center go. The world starts here and is whole. You know, one of those things you learn as looking back at these is I had no sense of the similar mythology that I internalized in Eastern Oregon. I didn't have that same sense of mythology in Western Oregon at all, in Western Washington. Okay, two of the poems that the readers picked up, they said to me, George, you have a lot of deer poems in this book. Maybe you better take out a couple of deer poems, right? So I said, well, okay, I'll see what I can do. But eventually, 2 deer poems still crept in here. So I want to just read you 2 different versions of one poem. The speaker has no fence and is living well out of town. And the other poem, the speaker has a fence and is living in town. Regardless, of course, the deer do what they please, right? You've seen this moment of great humor where somebody comes into town and says, why are all the shrubs trimmed up 6 feet? They look like shrubs, right? Yeah, and of course, that's the Deer Incorporated pruning service. Right? They come to town to clean up your act in the winter, right? Right. Okay, so here's the first poem. This is the speaker is a gardener with no fence. And it's called "In the Time of Gold Trees," which alludes to the changing of the seasons and the larch that now defy the coniferous description by changing from green to gold. The doe comes down carefully to kale. In the dark she comes nibbling so quiet, the dog doesn't hear, thief, lover, dreamer, ghost. It is late November now, too late to change, too late, the kale so green, so rich, that snow cannot touch its potency. How did she know it was time? The doe comes down again for kale. In the morning half the leaves are gone. Nothing but her perfect tracks are left for me to taste. Those triangles in my soil that will never disappear. How did she discern this vulnerability, this ripeness? I'm only 48 this fall. The doe comes down at dark for kale, and I shout at her, and she runs, and I think of poaching her sweet steaks, meat close to home. There is a doe eating the kale, I tell my wife. Don't kill her, she says. So she will continue to take my garden to Glass Mountain. Half of my row is there now, half gone. Why did she come this year? Why now? Why is she made of fire? The other poem for the deer who come to town, right, is Visitor in December. At midnight you watch the shadowy doe jump your fence. The pickets buried in new snow. She knows exactly what she's hungry for. Apples that fell, all fall underneath the tree. right there. Better have a drink of water. She remembers how sweet, how full, how many windfall nights fell down for her, and here she comes in cold December. To her memory of that feast, buried now, lost, underneath the feet of furious snow. Still she stands there on your shoveled walk, raises her svelte muzzle in the freezing night, inhales deep for any source of to feed her wildest hunger now. Her black nostrils flare and fill with strange delight. Some new sweet scent descends. She lifts the shadowy head and inhales again. Yes, yes, she thinks, above me there is food. And she stretches out her strong neck, her silk and huge and tender radar ears. Taking in the night, stretches up, rears up on her haunches, there, and yes, as her chin enters your newly hung bird feeder, dangling from the tree, sweet seeds spill onto the snow, sweet seeds stick to her tongue, and so fine and you tense. See her invent this dance. She lifts on 2 feet, fills her mouth, comes down on 4, chews it up, swallows it, then lifts up again with that wild two-step, has another bite of your seed. Until literally every seed is gone from that feeder, and you are lost in laughter and relief and joy as she jumps your fence and wanders off again, and Jesus, oh Jesus, how little you understand. Just never know who's going to show up in the yard, I'll tell you. Okay, here's two poems from various places in the book that are about domestic animals. As the first one memorializes the genius of student liars. It's called Excuses in Snow. The morning of deep snow, I being lost as usual after early class, I wandered out to study the white tongues fallen overnight. New, silent, absolute, breathing in the frozen air as though I were some explorer staggering toward a pole. I stood on icy, treacherous steps of stone and snared as snow plows arranged the storm in berms. As I waited there, an older student came to me. Sorry to be late today. The blind calf came through our fence again. I had to get her in. The neighbors were gone. She might have died if I hadn't stayed. I turned to her, 50, stocky, bright, fair. She lived a farm I knew far out of town. Blind calf, I said. How can this be? Well, why they keep her, I don't know, she said. I put her in a pen with our blind cow. Blind cow? I asked. Well, I don't know why we keep her either, she said. Black Angus? I asked. Yeah, she said. So a blind black calf lost in 2 feet of snow. How does it find its way? I asked, incredulous. She stared at me. She didn't know the continent where I stood, 30 years of teaching gone. It must know where feed and water are, she said. At your barn? I asked. Yeah, she said, that's where the calf always comes. Did I miss anything important? Let's go in, I said. I walked with her to hot coffee in the union waiting, attendants drifting beyond control, all late in too late life, again excused by storm. You get the tip there, right? Okay. And here's a poem from the Multnomah County Courthouse. Mrs. Too Many Cats sways back and forth, presents her 300 pounds, her huge blonde wig, her red bruised cheeks before the judge. Impassive as the Sphinx of Egypt long ago, she blinks and waits, stares and sways, while the animal control officers, athletic women neat in short hair, uniforms, and belts, point out her neighbors have complained for years that her house reeks urine, cat scat fills every room, her toms roam and snarl and breed and fight all night, and litter of kittens after litter of kittens pours out in numberless dozens. As Ms. Too Many Cats stares down the starry flag, they testify she's too poor to feed them all. They testify no one can go in her house without a mask. In his black choir robe, the grave judge sits and decides. No cats for 5 years, he says. And tomorrow, you must give up all your kittens by 11 o'clock. Is that a convenient time? Swaying, her red lipstick in a clownish frown, Miss Too Many Cats cups her hand behind her ear. stares at the judge and sways in her old stand coat. She's deaf, this citizen. She stands there heavy, lonely, desolate. As the gavel falls on her debility, Miss Too Many Cats is silent now. When the bailiff leads her out to pay her fine, a kitten, black and white, suddenly pops out of her collar, stares around, lets out one plaintive, long and loud meow, and the whole gallery where I sit with my son explodes in joy. The judge, the pharaoh of all sentences, remains monumentally demure, pyramidal, composing the gold mask of his dying face. These are two really long poems about driving. You know how this goes when you grow up under the influence of Richard Hugo and Bill Stafford. You may remember that time when they were kind of competing with each other over writing driving poems. Driving Montana, Hugo, and then Stafford would write some more driving poems about driving Eastern Oregon, back and forth, back and forth. It's like they knew they were inventing. But I think I'm going to skip those from the beginning. Skip the driving poems for now. They're both about the same length. It's an amazing process. I don't know if you writers do this like I do it, but sometimes I just take a tape recorder and put a microphone over my neck and turn it on and drive and say whatever occurs to me and then transcribe that when I get home. Yeah. But these next two poems are both from Sojourns Abroad, which I think have something to offer still. In the winter of 1966, I dropped out of the University of Salamanca in Spain, where I'd gone by myself before the age of 21, and had decided to hit the streets because I had enough money left from working in the woods during the summer, to basically live as long as I wanted to, as long as I was just camping in my tent, in my sleeping bag, in my camp kit, and treating Spain as though it were an American wilderness, right? Easy enough. So this is a poem called Street Cries in Spain, where you hear the voices of 4 different vendors, right, in Spanish. Street Cries, Spain, Salamanca, 1965. Up the still, dark stairs where you hover at the last edge of sleep, his bass voice comes chanting the first holy fact of a Salamanca day. El panadero, el panadero. 3 notes and 2 high. You hear the door latch click, and Senora Teodora Sanchez descends for her round loads of morning bread. Pushing his blue handcart and grindstone down the Siesta Street, he rolls on steel wheels, singing his passing presence to all the closed and whitewashed doors. El afilador, el afilador. Rising, falling, rising, his low tenor sure, his knives sharp enough to kill. No one comes out. The children of Valencia follow him, taunting his monkey. Alicante. From labyrinthian streets, from whitewashed walls, his voice seems to be the silence of olive groves and moors in an old Mediterranean afternoon. El Sigero, El Sigero. 1 tenor call every 3 minutes, no more. High, low, and middle, his tune forever resolving softly with his wooden wheelbarrow. There must be chairs to mend by the sea. The blind man with his bad goiter hunkers against the sandstone pillar in the plaza, his white cane tapping the frozen flagstones. The lottery tickets are pinned to his overcoat like daily medallions. His baritone call resonates across the frozen classical Castilian afternoon. La loteria para hoy toca el gordo. 25 years ago, of course that's wrong now, hitchhiker and student, I heard these cries in the streets of Spain. Franco was dying. I had only money for food. These nameless voices called out to me then. Ineffable courage, indelible music. I cannot forget them, I cannot. They carry me along somehow, even now, toward hope that someone is listening within, to a singer passing, to a singer bringing some necessity along. Where'd you get all those titles, those characters? Red Man, el panadero, knife sharpener, afilador, yeah. Sillero, the chairmender, and the lottery seller, right? Okay, in 1982-81, I taught at the University of South China in Hunan province. And because of the difficult conditions there for family, for my 2 kids and my wife, they all basically escaped to Australia without the permission of the government. And I was there basically getting ready and working on the project to translate the poetry of I Ching, who is Ai Weiwei's father, if you know who Ai Weiwei is. I Ching was the most widely respected modernist poet in the People's Republic of China before. He had been exiled for 20 years to Xinjiang province and not allowed to write or publish or read or do anything. But I had been able to persuade my translators to contact him in Eugene because I learned that he'd just been returned from exile after those 20 years and had a new book out. So this poem is about the process of beginning to engage that translation project. From the book was called Songs for Coming Home. Irony, huh? Right? The government has put you in a prison camp for 20 years. Yeah, you're still going to write the poem. So this is the other thing to remember, I guess to know, is that the foreign experts compound in China had a 12-foot wall around it with glass embedded in the top and a gatekeeper with a rifle. Nobody got in without being allowed to check in and leave their personal ID. So instead of, I was teaching English, literature, and writing both, and being as subversive as possible. But it was still the foreign experts compound. Right? Rain empties on Hunan. January, a gray afternoon. The grind of roller skates across the wall is gone. I go to the gatekeeper's wife to ask her for some fire. My family, 10,000 miles gone, no letters in 3 weeks. From my blue concrete room, I see one peasant working alone in his garden. His heavy hoe falls and rises silently among his winter vegetables. His hat a mountain in Oregon across the Pacific Ocean. I must boil more water for tea now. Translate 20 years of exile into these cold English words. Some of those translations eventually appeared in Northwest Review, and some of them were also in Magic Circle, if you're curious. Working in the woods, as it was called when I was growing up, was a commonplace in my family. My grandfather was a logger, and my uncles and aunts, and my uncles were loggers, contractors and road builders for the Forest Service and so on. So I grew up with that tradition as part of the, as part of making your ends meet as a person in the state of Oregon, right, that doesn't pay very well. You have a lot to do with wood. This is and wood cutting. See, there are three names in this first stanza of this poem called Jippo. One is old Joe Paget, who was a church member. Hoodoo was the name of a mountain. Blanchard is the name of a town below that mountain. And Spirit Lake, of course, is the name of a town in northern Idaho, where I lived for 6 years. Roger Weaver wrote in his review of this book, he wished he could have written this poem, and he's already memorized it, which I thought was amazing, a complimentary. So Jippo, right? Old Joe Paget ran a lumber mill sawing hoodoo pine out Blanchard Way. One Sunday night in Spirit Lake, our hymns and prayers and testimonies, my stepfather's preaching all done, Joe held up his right hand. "See that, boy?" he said to me. "That taught me patience. So let that be a lesson to you now." In that cold sanctuary, I stared and stared. His thumb was gone. Then he shook my hand. His stub of bone and iron fingers gripped like God, and my face turned red. I was 12 that year and new in Idaho. Joe Paget's voice burned with wilderness that night, 40 years ago. Why can I not forget? The Basque sheep herders, they came to eastern Oregon and western and Nevada during the 19th century, were well known to everyone. But they had become, itinerant in other ways. This poem commemorates a Basque herder named Jean Hospital, who one afternoon we went out, my wife and I went out to buy some black fleeces from him because he was one of the few people who had real black wool, right, from his marker ewes in his flock. Most of everybody else's flock was always white wool, right? Yeah. And so I spoke, I met him there. Then within 2 weeks or so, he was dead. So this is a poem for him because that wool kept insisting that I say something, right? So this is an apostrophe directly to Jean Hospital. 1930, 1979. You died as I could, snag on the mind. I've fallen enough timber to know how easy it is not to hear that slight, deadly crack in the top. I know you didn't look up. The chainsaw roared in your ears as you stood waiting like a lamb while the widowmaker fell. Widowmaker is a piece of timber that breaks off and falls without people knowing it, right? 3 white horses graze your pasture now, Jean Hospital. Your gates are locked. Your wife gone to town, boys back in school 2 weeks after the funeral. All your sheep are gone and steel. As your truck at your auction, everything sold high. The realtor is out there now nailing up for sale. Do you want me to show how you loved your dogs, or drank the brown goat's milk? Should I say we spoke in Espanol that day going down to buy these 5 black fleeces still waiting here? Should I say the ache in your eyes as you saw the pasture dying in the heat, your ewes grown thin? Should I put here your jeans reeked with lanolin and sweat? Should I buy your farm? I had no such money when the empty trucks rolled in. What do you want from me? Watching my wife spin the wool your dead hands sheared, I make the little I know into this prayer for you, Jean Hospital. Pyrenees, receive this man. I send him home. Inside the mountain that watched him being born, cover him with wool and let him dream. This is all I can say for you. Adios, pastor. Leave me now. I have wood to cut today. Okay. Are we right on schedule, Tom?
Yeah.
Shall I,
Good.
two more and we're done?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. I remember you prompting me half an hour for questions, right?
We'll see how many questions.
Okay.
Yeah, if there are that many questions.
Okay, well, it'll be, this
It
is.
doesn't usually go that long.
Okay. One night in the middle of a blizzard out of the Ladd Canyon, in the Grand Ronde Valley, I was reading Robert Ardrey's Territorial Imperative. If you know that book, you know it's about how space becomes important to everybody, and people claim territory as identity, right? And there's in a lot of other ways. And then his description of the emperor penguin and its ritual just came right off the page to me. And I have no clear particular interest why. But the emperor, so this is a poem called "The Emperor Breeds Only on the Ice." This was the Andreas Berger Award-winning poem in 1994, chosen by Karen Swenson. The emperor breeds only on the ice. After Robert Ardrey. When March comes and that southern autumn darkens into winter, pairs of emperor penguins march inland across the Antarctic ice to that place where they must breed. On fathomless freeze, she lays their single egg, and he picks up the egg on his foot. Then she and her friends go back to the sea, their only source of food. Close to the circle of males, each with an egg on his foot, he remains. They begin to move. Perpetual night encloses them. The zero winter blows, shudders, snaps, crushes, torments them now, as it has tormented every year. Each stands with an egg on his foot. Shoulder to shoulder, they preserve their heat. There are no fights over property, dominance, borders, ideologies. Once or twice the night clears. They see the Southern Cross, its crucifixion clear. The Southern Aurora displays its veils, far away, shifting, impalpable, tantalizing, rewardless. More often, the snow whites them out. Wind cuts the lawn beyond calculation, and in 2 months, on that fathomless ice, they live the terror of soft illumination. And they revolve there, this fasting masculine mass, each with an egg on his foot, presenting this one on the edge to hostility, giving that one at the center a moment of warmth. Can we apprehend these nights in a mass of male emperor penguins, revolving each with an egg on his foot, in dark, frozen, endless Antarctic? You do not know. I shall not know. We must learn this kind of love. Okay, round up. This will be the, I'm supposed to, well, let me read this one. This is another bird poem. I call that a bird poem, although it's obviously more than that. The neighbors that moved in next door included Brock Evans and his wife, and Linda Garcia. Brock being the Sierra Club representative in Northwest for years and also at Washington, D.C. But they were bamboozled in that gigantic winter blizzard we had because they didn't know the names of any of the birds that they were showing up after the blizzard. You know how that goes? So I wrote them this poem for Christmas, right? With political implications. that they appreciated with the phrase white indifference, right? Maybe you'll appreciate that too. Some of the music for the birds. So these are, Deal Canyon is the name of a canyon flowing into the Grand Ronde Valley. Deal Canyon blizzards, birds after a blizzard. When nothing moves under tons of white indifference, wild Christmas birds lure you out to admire their black eyes. There a chatter of high starlings wheel, turn, then descend the frozen blue, settle their jazz in the naked birch next door. And there a Steller's jay lands atop the chain-link fence, cocks a black and wily topknot, struts, then scolds the snow. And there the dark Oregon juncos come down the drifts, flit along the wall and walk, sign their solos with tiny toes, all filigree and snow. And there over the gable, dark winter hawk hunts an English sparrow in one talon, lunch on the fly when God looked away. And there a gobble of turkeys marches up the street, leaving their trail of triangles for peace. Then disappeared in mountainous green pines, and there, among the spruce limbs, one magpie lights, balances that baton of lonesome, beautiful tail, black eyes always watching, and there, those gray Asian doves, their sudden flights invade the hungry afternoon, calling, more love, more love, more love. All right, so I'll stop there, right? Actually, I realized I'm supposed to read the
broadside. Yeah,
the broadside.
Right.
Well, maybe I'll answer some questions first and then go to the broadside. How's that?
Yeah, okay. All right.
Understand it? Okay, questions? Anybody have a query or two or three? Or?
Go ahead. I do too.
I think I do. First off, let me just say how blessed we are to have an opportunity to hear your brilliance. And I'm not just saying that loosely. But what I wanted to ask you was, I listen really intently to poets and when I read.
Yeah.
And one of the things I felt like I was picking up on was you seem to take painstakingly care to modify a noun. And then, or, an adverb. So for example, like in one I heard, one of the phrases was still, S-T-I-L-L, dark stairs. So you modified stairs with dark, and then you modified dark stairs with still.
Yeah.
Another time in the poem about Spain, you said white cane. You could have just said cane, which you made it a point to make. You're making nouns more concrete. And then the final one was the one in China, where the translating poem, I heard you use a phrase like blue concrete walls. Yeah. I was wondering, in your writing, are you pre-thinking that you want to modify walls with concrete and concrete with blue, or is it just what comes to you when you want to describe the noun?
Yeah, that's not. In the case of the blue walls, they were also sweating.
Oh, okay.
Because there was no, there was no central heating in China in those walls, right? So I had survived by putting a hot plate underneath the table and then draping the table with a quilt, right? And so, and the walls were in fact blue, right? Yeah, but it suggested to me that that was. So those are not intentional, right? Those are trying to replicate the claritas detail of what I'm seeing.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Tom.
Well, I had a writing question too, and you've written a lot. And one of the things you said was that you got in the car and you had a recorder, I believe, and you talked what came to your mind.
Yeah.
Do you type that out?
Sometimes.
And I think a larger question is, when do you write?
Okay. Well, the driving poems used to be more frequent, right? When I knew I was going someplace and potential that I'd been before, but when you go through it, you know, in the case of, you know, say that the poem that I didn't read, where I'm basically going through a country, you know, where I see everything. I learned all the names of these places with these things, you know. And I think that one I did go home and then I typed it up. Right, yeah. But the larger question of when I write, usually I write in the morning, second cup of coffee in hand, and when I was teaching, I would basically go out, you know, into the garage or wherever I was getting away from everybody and work in the morning until it was time to go to work, and then I would, you know, and then I would start the next day and do the same thing. This was the sacrifice I made, you know, before I was teaching basically half time, because the school was so inflamed with poverty that you know, they wouldn't necessarily want to hire a writer full time. Yeah. So I, you know, it was basically right in the morning. Then in the summer, there was always something that had to be done outdoors, right? Because I lived on a small farm, right? And so I would tend, when it was cooler, I didn't have AC at that point, right? And so I would write in the evening when it was cool. Yeah. So yeah, well, it's a various various practice, but I think you could say George writes in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then he comes back the next day, and he reads what he wrote the day before, and he revises what he wrote the day before, you know, and then he puts that away, and then he writes something new, right, and then lets that sit there and goes away. So the next day when he comes back, he's seeing just a first draft of something, right, and they'll revise that before he goes to something new. The solution, as I'm sure other writers have, of solving the blank page problem. I don't want a blank page. I want to see something on there. Yeah.
Okay.
Going, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. You realize this might be the last reading I'm going to give in this world. Right? I mean, Bill and I were just talking. We're both 75, right? Yeah, and you know, you're looking over the edge these days, wondering what's going to happen next, right? Yeah.
What got you started writing, and when did you really begin to start writing poems?
Oh, that's a really interesting question for one reason, and that is that everything I did in graduate school for my MFA was all short fiction. Okay? And I took one course from Richard Hugo in writing poetry, and that was it. You know, then when I was hired in LeGrand, you know, as the only person teaching creative writing of any kind, right, I had to learn to write poetry, and of course, you know, and so that's when it really started. When I was an undergraduate, you know, I was basically still writing stories. Yeah, and you know, I've been hunkering. You know, you can tell a lot of my pieces are narrative, right? For which I don't apologize. You know, I think it's one of those things that gives language coherence and beauty and drama. So it's basically, I started writing poetry when I had to learn to teach it. Yeah. So I just told myself, you know, I'm just going to be the best student in the room. I'm going to read all these books and go to these conferences and listen to you know, my elders and see if I can figure out what I'm going to say next, and instead of what they're saying. Yeah. That was my only way to keep credibility, I thought, integrity with my students. Yeah.
Well, if there aren't any more questions,
George,
you're going to read. Yes, you're going to read the broadside.
We're going to read the broadside, right?
Yes.
Poet's choice when they do it.
Okay. Let's see if I can remember where I put it. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Are you ready? Okay. Awakening. All night while you slept, One green tree just beyond your pane plashes and bows and trembles in the rain, trying not to break in wind that never could relent. This morning you look out. The wind has died, rain stops. One green gold life, one form, one tree stands obvious enough. Bold limbs begin to celebrate, to transform light, to sweetly feed that fine, tenacious mass of roots, the fists that gripped the earth last night, so blind, deep, dark, invisible, below, too deep in our underworld to see. May all the holy, furious roots you hold keep you live and green, awake to love and give in any storm.
Got a lot of love in your time.
George has books here for sale. He's going to be available to sign them. And for other questions, there's refreshments here. Please help yourself to that. George and I had this conversation via email, so we certainly hope that it's not the last reading, George.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay. If you
Can we give George a thank you so much for doing this?
Well, thank you so much.